Well, good morning, and you are back with me. We are doing Lovers, Friends, and Enemies, the astrology of Congressman Matt Gaetz and Joel Greenberg. This is our next installment, and this particular video also has some bonus material about a very special and not so common aspect found in charts. The promises of sexual fantasies fulfilled. So here's let's review a little bit. So here's what we know about Matt Gaetz. We know that he carries a Venus in Aries, Mars in Libra opposition. His Mars is retrograde in Libra. It is in a weak position for it. Mars is in its fall. It's in the opposite sign that it wants to be. So Mars wants to be in Aries, and Venus also is in a weak position. It is in its fall because it wants to be in Libra. Now, these two planetary pairings, what's important to note about this is that they make what's called a mutual reception. That means that they're both in the respective signs that the other one wants to be in. So if we took Venus and Mars and switched their positions, Venus would be in its ruler, Libra, and Mars would be in its ruler, or rulership rather, Aries. So we've got a really strong mutual reception happening with these two planets. So Venus-Mars aspects, particularly hard aspects in a chart, tend to heighten, exaggerate, or make more visible the love or erotic nature of the individual. This can present itself as a certain kind of sex appeal that's hard to put your finger on, as it were, or it could be it could manifest itself as an overwhelming interest in the pursuit of erotic attention or pursuits. So here's the thing that I want to say, and I want to be a little more clear about this. So when we talk about the Venus-Mars contacts and hard aspect, and we talk about the exaggeration or the amplification, the elevation of the love pursuits or the love interest. This is not the same thing as saying that this person is going to run around being overwhelmingly aroused all the time, pursuing other people. We have to remember that we're looking at two planets, not just one. So while Mars rules the erotic nature, right, and our sex drive and our energy levels and our ambitions and our will to fight, Mars rules a lot of things. We're also dealing with Venus as part of this configuration or this expression. And Venus is very much about, among all the things that Venus is about, Venus is also very much about attention, right? Seduction, all the social graces that make life lovely, being beautiful, being thought of as beautiful, being worshipped. It's the goddess energy, as it were. So with Venus and Mars together, especially in a male chart, what you will get is somebody who wants to be worshipped like a god. And if you know anybody who has Venus-Mars conjunct, square, or opposition in very, very close degrees, you're probably going to agree with me that that's exactly how they seem to come off, even if they don't come out and say that. With women who have hard aspects between Venus and Mars, square, conjunction, or opposition, it's a similar thing. You know, they see themselves as the embodiment of the goddess, and they see all pursuants or applicants for her attention, you know, as devotees, you know, to the goddess through her. So oftentimes, with a Venus-Mars connection in a female chart, more than "you shall worship me like a god," there is this way or manner with which they conduct themselves in their relationships that's very seductive and pulls people in, specifically and expressly for the purpose of receiving attention, right? Soaking up as much of it as they can. Now, with Venus and Mars configured tightly together, it can make a person very selfish, depending on the sign. This is not true for all of them. But remember, Mars is about survival, and in order to survive, you have to be like an infant. You have to be demanding and you have to be selfish. Your primary needs override everything else because it's about survival. And Mars rules Aries, which is the infant of the zodiac. So whenever you see Mars strong, you're going to see some selfishness express itself, because selfishness in the right amounts and the right context is a necessary survival trait. out of context and too much of it, it's no longer survival, it's just being abusive and selfish. Anyway, with Aries, especially with an Aries emphasis, and in this case, we've got Aries and Mars, like all is really amplified. With an Aries emphasis on top of this, what you're going to get is typically people who are very self-centered in their love nature. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing, so let's just get that out of the way. There are some people in this world that want selfish partners. They want a partner who will make it all about them all the time, you know, in private, or maybe in the whole relationship. We've seen marriages like that too. And we've also seen people who will take that as part of the compromise or the trade-off if they view their partner as so beautiful that this beauty, like, deserves and is worth the cost of dealing with the selfishness. So it's all about our values and priorities when it comes to relationships. And with this Aries Mars, Venus Mars combination, and especially as we're seeing in Matt Gaetz' chart, you know, there is the desire to be worshipped. There will be a very self-absorbed, selfish approach to the erotic nature. I couldn't admit, there's a reason he's chasing teenagers, because grown women would not put up with this crap from him. God, I can only imagine how awful he is to be a partner with. Anyway, because it's not all about you, Spanky. Okay, so, and also too, there are people in this world that want a selfish partner. They're all about like losing themselves in our partner and absolving their ego through service and suffering. It's not my trip, but those people exist, and you know, there's a, what is it they say, there's a lid for every pot. So when you see this, don't make the automatic assumption that this is a bad thing, but do understand that if a person, a potential partner, is looking for someone who is more equanimous in their affections and more democratic about how relationships are supposed to be handled, you know, and want someone who's actually there because they want to be there with them, as opposed to they want to be there with them because they need someone to worship them, then, you know, this particular combination might be a little difficult to live with. I'm just saying, like, everybody's got their thing, to each his own, but you got to know what you're dealing with, because you cannot change a leopard's spots to tiger stripes. It will not happen. What you have is what you have is what you have. Okay. So who is Matt Gaetz? Well, we know right coming out of the gate with his Venus-Mars opposition emphasizing Aries, and certainly Libra. His Mars is retrograde in the sign Libra, which is not a healthy, optimal position for Mars to be in. That Mars retrograde in Libra makes it more Aryan, I suppose, is a way to describe it, but it's not any of the nice things we expect with Libra. So we'll get into that in a second. Anyway, so with his chart and this particular combination, we're looking at somebody who literally wants to be worshipped. I want to be worshipped as a god, the god that I am, or at least that he imagines he is. He's also incredibly self-serving and self-absorbed when it comes to the love nature. So he would have to have partners that are either extremely submissive or masochistic, I suppose, but maybe more submissive, extremely submissive. Or he would have to have very young, inexperienced partners that don't really know, you know, how debilitating having that kind of selfish partner is over the long haul, you know, or that would worship him as a god, because they don't have enough life experience in the world to know a difference. They don't have anything to compare it to, relatively speaking. So that answers a lot of questions right there. So, and also too, there's this whole conquering thing. They want to be the first one in kind of thing, you know, front of the line. Oh God. Anyway, Matt Gaetz is every guy no one, well, me anyway, that wants to deal with. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about that Mars retrograde in Libra. So Mars in Libra in and of itself can be a very complicated, tricky position, because Libra is the lover, not the fighter, and Mars is the chest-beating Neanderthal warrior. Roar, I am Crow. So when you get the barbarian dressed up in a velvet pantsuit, right, going to a high society function, it can be a little clumsy. And this is kind of what happens when you get Mars in Libra. So we tend to get people who overcompensate, right? Because they're not comfortable in the uniform that they're wearing. They're not completely sure how these rules work. They're completely alien to their essential nature. Mars doesn't really do diplomacy. So when you put Mars in the sign of diplomacy, it's a little clumsy with it. And when people are clumsy with things and are trying to figure out how something works, they tend to go to one extreme or the other. They overcompensate. So if you think about it in that context, right, reframe it in that context, and then you think about this barbarian, right, in high society diplomatic positions, you can see how this might be a little awkward. So you get either somebody who is overly solicitous and compromising and in an attempt to be diplomatic, right, or you get the exact opposite. You get somebody who overcompensates and is only conciliatory or compromising for a scant few minutes, but the first opportunity they have to bring the hammer down and make it all about them again, wonk, I am Kroll. And then they go back to being Mars, right? It's a challenging position. Also, too, with Mars and Libra, the nice thing about it is that no matter how it's being expressed in whatever situation it's in, Mars in Libra is driven to try and find a fair way to do things. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Mars in Libra wants things to be fair, right, or balanced, which is kind of funny when you think about Matt Gaetz, who's basically taking advantage of teenagers, and young women who don't know any better because, he insists on being worshipped like a god. And this is the only people who are going to buy into that. And he tries to make it fair by giving them very generous financial compensation because he knows he's a selfish horse's ass. He knows he's not giving them anything. He's not offering them anything. He's got nothing of value that's going to help them improve their lives, right? Except money. So he knows he's selfishly using them for his own personal entertainment, but he's trying to be fair about it, so he's financially generous, right? It's a trade-off. At least in his mind, that's how it works. Yeah, astrology. Ooh. Okay. Now, with Mars and Libra retrograde, this gets a little complicated because Mars retrograde is a tough position to have because it's not guaranteed to, but it can make the person more meek and timid, or it can make the person exceptionally calculating and strategic. So remember, Mars is the planet for Aries, and Mars is a very simple, direct, childlike sign, right? It's very, not gullible, but it's very straightforward. So it sees, it wants, it gets. That's pretty much, it's a straight line in its thinking and its actions, right? Which is great when you need somebody who's very upfront and very honest about where they're at and what they want. But with Mars retrograde, you get somebody who's more hesitant to be open and clear about what they're going for or what they're doing. They're more hesitant to be aggressive about things. So this is still a fighter. Mars in retrograde is still a fighter, but the difference is, I suppose the difference is like the barbarian who will be in your face and like literally drag you by your hair and then beat you to the ground with your own stupidity, for engaging him in the first place. Or this is, the calculating sniper. This is the person who says, okay, all right, I got this. You go right ahead and keep yelling. I got this. And they're literally, while you're ranting and raving and carrying on, they're not responding overtly or in equal, angry exchange. They're measuring, they're analyzing, they're taking mental notes, because when all of this is done and your blustering is over, they're coming for you. And no matter how long it takes or what they got to do, they're coming for you, and you're never going to see them coming because they're plotters and planners, right? Mars retrograde is strategy. Mars direct is action. When you have Mars direct, you have somebody like most people who takes direct action because the shortest distance between two points is a straight line. In those situations where you have Mars retrograde, all of that Mars energy is internalized. So you either get somebody who's very meek and timid because they can't express their Mars, or you get somebody who's a strategist, a planner. These are the dangerous ones because they will wait years to get you back for that. But they'll get you. Oh, they'll get you. Kind of like Scorpio, except with Mars and Libra, they're being very sweet the entire time. Like you will forget that you did something wrong. Mars and Scorpio will let you know while you're doing it, oh, I'm going to get you. Like, you'll know because you'll feel the hair raise up on the back of your neck because Mars and Scorpio is psychically and non-verbally letting you know you are toast. Mars retrograde in the other sign tends to be a lot more quiet about it. So you don't really, you think you've gotten over this person's very weak. In reality, they're setting you up. They're already setting you up. And the final possible expression for Mars retrograde is, there's two. One, because the plot or the planet, this is a more mental rather than physical expression. The final other alternative, well, not final, but the other alternative for a Mars retrograde expression is that you have somebody who turns all this anger inward, right? So rather than taking it out on you, they turn it in on themselves. And this is where you get people who are struggling with things like depression or masochism or self-sabotage, or other things that are not going to help you get forward in life and actually end up hurting you more, because Mars retrograde will internalize that Martian energy, right? So that Martian anger gets internalized, and that could result, if that's what happens, that could result in depression, because that's internalized anger. It could result in self-sabotage and masochism and all the other things that would be you turning your anger on yourself instead of the situations and people that you should be, that deserve it, right? The other way that you can see this Mars retrograde, when it's internalized, when it's turned back in on itself, can also be either through hyper-intellectualism, so they're literally more in their head than they are in their bodies, which is basically what you get with the plotters and planners. Or if we're talking about sexuality, it is absolutely possible with Mars retrograde that you're going to get somebody who's more comfortable being alone or taking care of themselves. Now, the thing to understand is this is not an absolute rule, and it's not true for everybody, because there are certainly people who are very self-sufficient that have Mars direct. But the thing with Mars retrograde is that ultimately, especially when it comes to the erotic love nature, especially in Matt Gaetz' chart with Venus involved, really amplifying this, and mutual reception, what we're looking at is a possible picture of somebody who has to have a very specific and rigid and ritualized way of doing things in order for him to achieve his goal of relief, right? Or climax or satisfaction or whatever you want to call it. So in order for him to get where he's trying to go when he's being intimate with a partner, it's a very specific, ritualized, rigid kind of vehicle that he's got to be in to get him there. Because there's a script playing in his head, right? So that's kind of interesting. Now, obviously, we won't know unless somebody starts divulging all sorts of secrets in a tell-all book, My Time with Matt Gaetz. So this is all speculation. So take this with a grain of salt, but this is what it kind of looks like to me looking at his chart. Now, let's talk a little bit about this mutual reception. Now, the mutual reception is interesting because here's what it does. It strengthens the two planets involved, even though they're in weak position. Well, in this case, even though they're in weak positions. The planets are still weak, but they're at least supportive and helpful to each other, right? And this makes a difference. So in his particular case, with his Venus-Mars mutual reception, right? And with these mutual reception with planets in rulership and Mars retrograde, and, like an echo chamber, and. What this does is it increases the charisma, and the sex appeal that he has available to him. Now, I realize you're listening to this, you're like, what? Him? He's not charismatic. There's nothing sexy about that giant forehead alien. And I would agree with you. But remember also, too, that in spite of the fact that he's a complete dummy and he's a teeny bopper chaser, who literally can only, get aroused with children, basically. People are so inexperienced in life that you're basically dealing with, the equivalent of somebody who just graduated high school or still in high school. But also, too, and that giant forehead is, good God, you could play ice hockey on that thing. And the weird hairdo and the bad dressing and all the other stuff that in anybody else would, and him as well, just makes it look really unattractive, right? In spite of all of that, think about this. In spite of all of that, this man has enough charisma with enough people, and charisma means appealing to a large majority of people, not just a few people that love you, and think you're cute no matter how ugly you look. He still has enough charisma to have gotten himself elected, right? And to get himself in the company of not only attractive women, granted he's had to give them money, but listen, there's a limit to how much money grubbing a person can be before you're just like, nope, you're literally, your money's no good here. I don't even want you for the money. Like, it is possible. So there's that. And also too, he's apparently got a following. Now, granted, his following is with these blue-haired, blue plate specials down in Florida, you know, good Lord, anything under 100 like is attracted to them at this point, I'm sure. You know, oh, he's such a handsome young man. Well, yeah, Granny, because you can't see. Put your glasses on. I'm sorry. I just, ooh, this man gives me the creeps. Anyway, so the thing about it is with this Venus-Mars mutual reception, even though they're in weak positions, and they really are, when we reverse them, they're in rulership. So in many ways, Matt's ability to flatter people, and to try and find compromise, well, not compromising, but compromise and, you know, fair exchange, and, you know, this whole thing about trying to be, you know, partners. Maybe that's the thing. When you're dealing with him, you always feel like he's trying to be your partner, like on your side, like your team member, right? Which is very, very attractive to everybody. Like nobody's ever going to turn that down. But he's able to parlay this and use this to create an ample amount of additional support for him, and it works. So that mutual reception becomes very strong and very helpful to him in this way. So I thought that was interesting. Now also too, with Venus, no, all right, I'm not going to get into it because it's unless you're in the bedroom with him, it's speculation. So we're not going to have that conversation. But just suffice it to say, he's very selfish. He's very selfish. And I want to make a joke about him wearing superhero costumes or superhero underwear when he goes to bed, but that would not be based on astrology. That would just be me being smart. Okay, so now what does this have to do with his friend Joel Greenberg? Well, between the two of them, that opposition in Matt's chart now becomes a T-square in their shared charts with Greenberg's Jupiter and Neptune. And here's where the friendship gets interesting. So Venus and Mars is very much, among many things, absolutely about sex and erotica and sexual satisfaction and me, all the time me. It's all about him. You shall worship me like a god. I'm sorry, I just like saying that. And along comes Greenberg, who kicks off that opposition with his Jupiter-Neptune making a T-square formation. So the T-square in and of itself, especially between charts, is going to amplify or trigger or turn on or light up, however you want to describe it, the planets in opposition. So anything that Joel Greenberg had, get my pen down here, anything that Joel Greenberg had, right, that's here that sets off this T-square is going to amplify or light up, right? Like turn the lights on for that Venus-Mars. So right there we know that the association between Greenberg and Gaetz is absolutely going to light up his chart where his love nature is concerned. And certainly almost their entire relationship has been about Matt and sex and, you know, their mutual interests in young girls. Okay, now, so then we look at the planets involved, right? So who is Joel Greenberg to Matt Gaetz? Well, in this particular case, because this is Matt's erotic or love nature involved that's being lit up like a Christmas tree, this Jupiter-Neptune represents potential and fantasy, right? So Joel Greenberg, in many ways, brought to the table for Matt the promise of Matt's sexual fantasies being fulfilled. Now, I realize we're saying this and everybody's like, oh, wait, were they in bed together? No. Think about this for a second. So it doesn't have to be that if they were both homosexual, or if Joel was a woman, then this would absolutely, we could see this playing out as those two having a relationship with each other that was erotic in nature. But these are both, as far as we know, heterosexual men. Or at least they identify with each other as heterosexual, which means that their sexual behavior is not directed at each other, but at other people. So Joel Greenberg becomes a vehicle or a conduit through which Matt is able to, in his mind and his hopes, be able to pursue his erotic fantasies, right, or his sexual desires, that Venus-Mars opposition. So in that way, that Jupiter-Neptune leverages that for Matt, and this is what Matt sees when he sees Joel. Now, Joel's Jupiter and Neptune are in Capricorn, so there's a couple of things happening here. So the first thing is with Jupiter and Neptune together, typically what you get with any Jupiter-Neptune combination, but certainly Jupiter-Neptune conjunct, is you get a super salesman, right? You're going to get somebody who is able to offer and inspire and promise and infer, meaning they suggest without actually saying it, lots and lots and lots of things very successfully and very easily. This does not make them bad people. I mean, if people can deliver on their promises, then they're good people. It's when people promise you the sun, moon, and stars, knowing that they can't deliver, that's when they're bad people. So which one is Joel Greenberg? Well, I don't know. We don't know what he was promised. But we do know that his ability to create or inspire optimism and confidence in the ability to provide or promise whatever somebody is wanting is very easy and strong for him. The other thing is that he does a lot of it by inference. He doesn't actually come out and say it. There's just this kind of like wink and a nod. You kind of get it, right? Now, we would expect that to be coming from Matt because he's a politician and that's what they do. They never come out and actually say anything. God forbid they get held to their words, because that always gets them in trouble. That's why they hate journalists, because God forbid somebody should hold them accountable to what they actually said and promised. Anyway, yeah, sometimes people pay attention. In this particular case, that inference or suggestion or a promise of things is very easy for him. So I can only imagine how this went down with his friends. But again, whether he's a good person or a bad person, I suppose, where this particular aspect is concerned, depends on whether you deliver on your promises. So are you a scam artist if you promise criminal bonuses and rewards and you deliver on them? I mean, you delivered what you promised, and that's really what we're talking about here. I mean, there's still criminal things, but when it comes to this particular aspect and delivering what you promised, this doesn't make you a scam artist because you delivered what you promised, which is different from promising something that you know you can't deliver on. Just saying, little differences, right? So don't be too quick to judge. All right, now the other thing is that this Jupiter and Neptune is conjunct in the sign of Capricorn. Now there's a whole bunch of people that were born with this particular combination, so it's not like it's just Joel Greenberg by himself. So the other thing too is when you look at these aspects, you have to keep in mind that, one, when you're looking at an individual, you're looking at the entire chart combined. It's not this aspect or that aspect or this planet and that sign, by itself that tells a story or describes the nature of a person. That's ridiculous. It's the entire chart combined that's going to give you a picture of how these things are going to manifest. So with that said, Jupiter and Neptune conjunct in Capricorn has the potential to be very successful when it comes to things like marketing and sales and public relations, things where we're taking the ability to inspire confidence and infer things without actually saying it, and to get people to buy into whatever it is we're suggesting, inferring, or promising. When there's commercial application to it, because that's what business is, it's the commercial application of something. Art is art until you start selling it, then it becomes an art business. With that said, everybody in this generation has that ability. So social media, which is basically social media, now when it becomes a public relations advertising platform, right, a business, this becomes Jupiter and Neptune conjunct. So it would be interesting if you have time to look at the years when Jupiter and Neptune are conjunct, or people that you know that have Jupiter and Neptune conjunct, and see what their relationship to social media is, right? Instagram, Facebook, all this sort of stuff. You'll probably find a lot of them have this placement involving Capricorn. So with Joel, right, remember this Capricorn, that's a business sign. So Capricorn may have looked at this, right, this part of Matt's life that's lighting up like a Christmas tree, and in true Capricorn fashion said, I can make some money off of this. So Joel, because of this tight configuration here, right, may have decided on his own that, you know what, how do I make this a commercial endeavor? How do I make money with this? I'm telling you, Joel Greenberg and Roger Stone and Matt Gaetz being friendly, really friendly, is no coincidence. And Roger Stone, we know, had an apartment in New York that he shared with or lived with a air quotes former, I don't think she ever actually retired, madam. So she knows all the ins and outs of running a business or a brothel, right? Running other people, for sexual services, on demand for, people who are willing to pay that kind of price. So, Joel Greenberg could have learned a lot from Roger Stone. And Matt, with his political appointment in Congress, would have had access to a whole lot of potential clients that are looking to do all sorts of stuff they shouldn't be doing, but they need to do it in a way, that keeps them off the record. So they need a middleman. I'm just saying, I'm just saying, just speculating. So with that said, this T-square that shows up between the two of them that involves Jupiter and Neptune in the business sign of Capricorn and Matt's Venus-Mars in Aries and Libra, which is the sign of the selfish egotist. You shall worship me like a god. Sorry. I really enjoy saying that. You should see the face and the body postures I'm doing while I'm doing it. It's pretty funny. Anyway, so yeah, it is a T-square amplifier. The T-square is going to amplify whatever is involved in the opposition in a synastry chart, which is not the same thing as looking at T-squares in your natal chart. And in this particular case with these two characters, it is pimping in the name of ecstasy and opportunism. All right, so that's what we're looking at as a major aspect between these two charts. So let's just do a quick review of who we're dealing with here, right? So we've got Matt over here. All right, and Matt has this string of oppositions, right? So he's a full moon baby. He's got that Venus-Mars opposition that we just talked about. And he's also got the Captain Crazy Pants signature, that Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think she's definitely got some Mercury, Uranus stuff going. Anyway, involving Uranus. Now, the thing with Uranus is that, and I think this is interesting, so it's worth noting, right? Uranus is typically a very honest sign. They're not, I don't know if they're not good at lying or if they find more entertainment in being just obnoxious and telling the truth, whether people want to hear it or not. But as a rule, Uranus and Aquarians are they're not big fans of lying. They'd rather tell the truth and make people uncomfortable. When we're looking for deliberate deception, or anything that involves pretending, right, or alluding to things that are not completely accurate, Neptune and Gemini, and sometimes, well, maybe sometimes Pisces, but definitely Gemini and Neptune are the two things that I would look for first. Neptune, because they always have a kind of a different interpretation of reality and a loose association with the truth as a rule, right? It's good. Truth is relative. That's a Neptune statement. And Gemini, I say Gemini because Gemini will talk out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. So if you want somebody who does really good doublespeak, or who will literally go back on something they've said almost immediately and talk in circles until you're so confused you forgot what they were saying in the first place, like that's your Gemini person. Because Gemini likes to play games. They like to play games. And if they feel like telling you 26 variations of the truth and only one of them are true, maybe, is entertaining for them and you are a great target for that kind of game, they'll do it. They'll absolutely do it. Also, too, when strong Gemini energy is in trouble, because they're really not interested in taking accountability for things, because that means that they have to be held back, they have to be dragged back, and held in place to, deal with this thing. They don't want to do that. They want to move. And you making them accountable means that they're going to be stuck somewhere for a while dealing with this, and they're not interested in that. So when Gemini energy gets in trouble, typically what you get is this like rapid fire machine gun, like line, this barrage of words and catchphrases and buzz things. I mean, like literally they'll throw everything at you except the kitchen sink, to try and convolute and confuse and obfuscate and everything else, just to give them enough. They're literally trying to buy enough time to get them find some way to get out of this conversation or the situation. So it's an interesting thing when you see Geminis do their thing. And what's more interesting is if you look at their politicians' charts, a lot of them have very strong Gemini energy. So go figure, right? Go figure. So this is what we have. This is Matt. He's full moon baby, so he kind of lives in his own little, version of reality. But the other thing too is full mooners. Everything in their life is visible. It's all on the surface. Every feeling they have, every thought, everything's on the surface. They are on display all the time, and they're comfortable there. They need to be on display, although some of them will tell you otherwise. Ultimately, the more important thing is that everything, they're transparent in that way. So everything going on inside them, they wear on the outside of them. That's not hard to guess what's happening with them. With Venus and Mars in opposition like this, especially with his planets in Libra and Aries, the guy is just selfish as the day is long. Selfish and self-absorbed. This is not an ideal romantic partner unless you are extremely submissive or masochistic, and in either case just live to serve somebody else's ego and their wants and their needs and their desires, because it's all about them. If that's your thing, Venus and Mars in opposition and conjunct is your partner choice. We've got plenty of these characters to give you that the rest of us cannot deal with, so we want a little bit more balanced relationships. All right. And then finally, he's got Mercury and Uranus in opposition. So the thing with him, because he's got that Mercury and Gemini, double talk, double speak is his thing, like a machine gun, just a barrage of words and hot words, buzz phrases, and catchphrases, right? But it's involving Uranus, which normally is very honest. Like, Matt's clearly not being honest. Maybe. If we think about his little Venmo messages and stuff, I mean, this is hardly somebody who's working really hard at lying. Like, Jesus. So he's either stupid or he's just Uranian. Uranian. Because they'll tell the truth. It's a reflex. They will tell the truth before they will lie. It's just their nature. With that said, also, too, the thing to remember at Uranus is Uranus works in fits and starts and spurts. So blurting things out, which is typically what we associate with Sagittarius, blurting things out that are true unexpectedly is absolutely a Uranian thing. So the thing with Matt Gaetz that makes him very dangerous to other people, and remember this because this is important as this case continues, is that this propensity to just blurt things out because it's the truth, and that's what he naturally gravitates to, is blurting out the truth at the worst possible times or without thinking about it, because it's a reflex for him, is also dangerous to the people around him, because he could potentially, without thinking about it, accidentally blurt out the names or times or actions or behaviors or connections of other people that are involved in this hot mess he's in, right? So with this Mercury and Gemini opposing Uranus in Sagittarius, the things that I would expect are, first, that Mercury kicks in, the machine gun spray of words, right? Honey, she didn't mean anything. It's not what, like, pick every cliche response you've ever heard from a cheating man, right? Deny, deny, deny. And you're going to get just a machine gun spray of that until he gets tired. But what will happen, because Uranus is involved, at some point, that Uranus is going to kick in and is going to blur out the truth, because that's what Uranus does, right? Look at those Venmo messages. Like, there's a couple of them that are really good, and then next he's got stuff that are like practically screaming what the hell he's doing, right? And why he's doing it. That's the Uranus. It's a reflex. They can't help themselves. Okay. Now, yeah, this is going to get interesting. When those walls really close in on Matt and that door shuts to trap him in, ooh, it will be really interesting to see what comes out of his mouth then. Because right now it's all buzz phrases and catchwords while he's out on tour. Like, if you listen, it's all like literally manipulative language. It's all buzz phrases and catchwords that they know will inflame their audience, get them whipped up. And if you inflame people and you whip them up and get them all emotionally aroused, they stop thinking. Right? They follow their feelings and they stop thinking. And that's exactly what that language is intended to do. And that's why he's using the words that he does. Right? So listen carefully and think about it like that, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. All right. So Joel. Now, Joel is an animal of a different stripe here, obviously. So Joel carries a Sun square Mars Saturn. In and of itself, without looking at the signs that this is in, honestly, this makes him an ass. That Sun square Mars makes him overbearing, domineering, selfish, but selfish in a me first, I'm the most important thing in this room all the time, not just in bed, kind of character. That Sun square Saturn makes him cruel and selfish and stingy, right? So he's very withholding. Sun square Mars Saturn conjunction means that you have somebody who equates power and authority and manhood with cruelty and domination, and selfishness and being self-serving and being a mercenary. Like, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? What's this going to do for me? This is not a great position to have. His father was probably a beast because he had to learn this from somewhere. And the sun usually represents the father, although the Saturn can represent the grandfather or the grandparents. So he got this from somewhere. This has been modeled for him and reinforced in him from birth. So part of his challenge in life is to unlearn this, right? To recognize the toxicity of this behavior and to correct that in himself. With the sun making a square to that Mars Saturn, this is going to be a very big challenge for him. A necessary one, but certainly a big one. It won't be easy. So that right there tells us what we need to know about Mr. Joel Greenberg and his personality. I can't imagine, like, his wife must be a doormat. Jesus, who could be married to somebody like this? But apparently women are. I don't know. Now, if we look at the signs that this is in, right, Aquarius and Scorpio, this now it becomes even more problematic because Aquarius and Scorpio are both fixed signs, which makes them even more rigid and dug into this behavior. Literally heels dug into the dirt, like a game of tug of war. He's not budging on this. So getting him to change or recognize that these behaviors and attitudes are a problem is huge, huge. It would take a major upending life trauma event for him to even consider that maybe he's doing things the wrong way. And believe it or not, I don't think that this federal investigation is the life-changing trauma. It may actually need to be something, either him in prison getting hurt or his children getting hurt before he recognizes that there's a problem and this is not an okay way to live. That is unfortunate. The other thing is with Aquarius and Scorpio, especially in male charts, what you're going to get is hyper logical. These guys are so tedious. Oh my God, they're so tedious, and they're just I don't know how you women do this. Anyway, with Aquarius Scorpio combinations, what you typically get are guys, especially in male charts, because it's reinforced in men. It's not that it's because they're men. It's because in men, in our culture, globally, until things change, this is the nature and behavior we reinforce in our men. So they come by it fair. All right, so what it does is it makes them hyper logical, right? So there's this eschewment, this poo-poo of emotions and soft skills and all that feminine things, right? They see themselves as, they've got a very high opinion of themselves, and they see themselves as extremely intelligent, kind of like the Wile E. Coyotes of the Zodiac. Oh yes, I have a genius idea. And I'm saying this specifically about him because of this particular combination involving this, right? So it's not, let me just clarify, this is not about every person who has Aquarius, Scorpio, but for him in particular, this whole Wile E. Coyote, super genius, like that vision of himself is specific, absolutely specific to Mr. Joel Greenberg. So I'm sure that a lot of this bonehead stuff he did was literally like Wile E. Coyote, seemed like a genius idea at the time. And to this day, I will bet you he still thinks he's a genius. Oh my God. Anyway, so there's that. It's not easy. This is not a great position to have things, right? Now, on top of that, but wait, there's more. On top of that, the moon, his moon, is squaring his Uranus in the south node. So, again, the moon represents our origins or our beginnings. The south node, if you believe in reincarnation, represents your past lives. The moon also represents the unconscious or the deep ocean of stuff from which we are put together to incarnate in this lifetime. So there's a whole lot of deep, unconscious things, or subconscious, whichever would be better to use in this situation, that's happening that contributes to his insanity. So the other thing too is with this particular combination, right, with this moon squaring a Uranus south node conjunction, there is actually a distinct possibility that he, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, may be batshit crazy. It's not a loose relationship with reality as much as it is a parallel track in his brain. So there is the world operating the way the world does, and there's this whole other track alongside it, like a train track running at all times. That is this, what is it that ghoul Kellyanne Conway says, you know, alternate facts. Honey, that's not lies, those are alternate facts. So Joel Greenberg in his brain most likely has a separate parallel train track running of information that's comprised of nothing but alternate facts. This is not deception or lies or the untruth. These are alternate facts. So he's got all kinds of alternate facts running that shape his perception of reality. So he may very well be like a little Looney Tunes, you know, Wile E. Coyote, super genius. Oh, yikes. Um, Now, the other thing is that, just want to point this out real quick. So in his chart, especially with its Scorpio involvement, right? This in and of itself would suggest that he's got a tremendous amount of endurance or stamina. So when he digs his heels in about an idea or an action or a goal or whatever, like an ambition, like he digs his heels in and he is good for the course. Like he will not waver, sway, back off, nothing. He will endure as much as he needs to get where he's trying to go. This is a very powerful thing to have in a chart because it's the kind of stuff you expect with like ultra marathoners, these runners that just run these superhuman lengths. The ability to have that kind of endurance to stay the course through the end, no matter what is happening, is in and of itself a very, very special skill that should not be underrated. However, with him, at the same time, we've got this moon squaring Uranus in South Node. So he's got a very pronounced ability to endure. He's got a tremendous amount of endurance, but he has these moments where it's just like fits and starts, right? So, for instance, where Matt Gaetz will do this thing where like machine gun spray all these, you know, hot phrases and buzzwords and stuff, you know, as he's trying to talk circles around you to confuse you to get out of a situation. And then eventually that Uranus kicks in unexpectedly, and he spontaneously blurts out the truth. Like, whoop, where did that come from? That hiccup in the system, right? Because Uranus rules hiccups, right? It has difficulty regulating its energy. So with Greenberg, with Uranus in its south node, this is an Achilles heel rather than a hiccup. So there is a function inside of Matt that is coming from, you got to believe in reincarnation to buy into this next set of statements, that comes from previous life experiences, right? Where he has been stopped short or abruptly stopped in the process of trying to get wherever he needs to go. So there's a part of him that is still replaying old tapes. He is still reliving old traumas, you know, where he was committed to doing something and these efforts that he was making were broken or interrupted violently over and over and over again, truncating or interrupting his ability to get where he was trying to go or accomplish what he was trying to accomplish. So unconsciously, that break or interruption, he is expecting, and in many ways he will stop himself or self-sabotage. He will sabotage himself before he gets there, because a past life memory remembers how violently and traumatically he was interrupted by external sources. So in this lifetime, he may very well be unconsciously stopping himself abruptly, like a reflex, without even realizing why he's doing it, because he's trying to avoid repeating the trauma his unconscious past life memory is remembering, right? And that's for that moon. And I know this is a big stretch, like we're talking some real like woo-woo stuff here. But it is an interesting thought, right? So when we look at these aspects, so we have to kind of stretch our mind a little bit, because we're trying to take the cosmology of the stars above us and make sense of how it is a mirror of what's happening down here with us, because the stars do not compel, the stars only reflect. So as above, so below. The stars are only going to show you a reflection of the dynamics happening down here. They will not make you do anything. All right. So with that said, Joel is on a very specific trajectory, and it's interesting in that, again, remember we talked about this north node, this north node south node connection that these two have, right? We talked about that, and we were saying how looking at that, because now I'm thinking about it, makes sense, right? That it's possible that for some reason and somehow Matt and Joel have come together, because Matt is here specifically to interrupt a pattern for Joel, right? There's some type of disruptive pattern breaking, the stone breaker, that is happening as a result of Matt's presence in Joel's life. And it doesn't make any sense because it really looks like Joel is definitely interrupting Matt's life moving forward. Joel has made some serious problems for Matt that are going to absolutely interrupt his ability to get on with his life. So on the surface, it kind of looks backward, right? Like that's kind of not how this looks right now. But if you think about it on a very deep karmic level, for those of you people who love the word karma, right? If you look at it on a very deep karmic level, or on a spiritual evolution level, or on a reincarnation level, it would be absolutely, it makes sense that Matt is here to play a pivotal role in breaking up a pattern for Joel, because without someone interrupting that, Joel could continue being this person literally for the next 5 lifetimes. He could literally continue doing this for the next 5 lifetimes and not think twice about it, and just wreak havoc and damage and disaster and trauma everywhere he goes, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. He could absolutely continue on this path because he's right here in this lifetime being the same person all over again, right? In all the wrong ways. But you know, in this instance, it looks like this relationship with Matt has brought all this to a screeching halt. And now Joel's going to have the opportunity to get off the karmic wheel and grow, right? To let go of these past behaviors, recognize where the problems are, and move on a spiritual level. So that, if we look at it that way, that's pretty interesting. And that makes all kinds of sense now that I'm thinking about that compared to those nodal conjunctions that we saw in the other video. So there you go. So today's bonus is a little visitation to an aspect called a mystic rectangle. Now, the thing about aspects, there are some aspects that are less common and certainly harder to find, and are very specific. So we have many, many potential aspects in a chart, but the primary ones we use are the foundations. Those are the ones we stand by. Aspects like this, mystic rectangles, grand shrines, kites, boomerangs, all the sort of stuff, like it's a very different animal, and they have very subtle effects on the chart. At the end of the day, it's your major aspects that are always going to tell a tale. Major aspects and planets in the signs. All right, so with that said, let's take a look at this mystic rectangle. Now, where do we find this mystic rectangle? None other than Mr. Matt Gaetz's chart. Now, when you hear the words mystic rectangle, you, like myself very early on, you're thinking to yourself, ooh, mystic, well, that's got to be important. And I tried, just to review, I tried looking up mystic rectangle online, and literally the interpretations run the gamut from one extreme to the other, and I honestly don't agree with pretty much all of them. No surprise there, right? Oh, he's Leo rising, 29 Leo rising, look at his hair. No, he's not Leo rising, he's Virgo rising. Look at the chart ruler. Sorry, that's an inside joke about everybody on the planet thinking Trump was Leo rising, and me continuing to this day to swear up and down he is like 0, 1, or 2 Virgo rising. Because if it were all about the hair to decide what your ascendant is, every redhead on the planet would be Aries rising. But that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, back to our mystic rectangle. So I'm seeing all these interpretations. I'm not really agreeing with any of it. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure how I'm feeling this. So then I went and looked up, and I'll put the link down below. I looked up a database that you can look up aspects or any combination of things to see which famous people has shared those things that you're looking up. So I looked up famous people with a mystic rectangle in their chart. And when you do this database, it shows a lot of actors and actresses, not because they all have more mystic rectangles than the rest of the population, but because they're actors and actresses, and so there are more of them that are famous than other people like scientists. Like, how many famous scientists do you know, other than Neil deGrasse Tyson, that are alive right now? Can you think of any? Right? Exactly. So they're really, really successful at what they do and very important and make tremendous contributions to society. They're not necessarily famous. So when you look up famous people, actors, actresses, and musicians are always, and sports figures are always going to come up in abundance, because there are more famous people in those categories, not necessarily more people with this aspect in those categories. Okay. So the first one the first of many that I found that was interesting was Dario Sierna. Now, I don't speak Croatian. I don't know how to pronounce this poor guy's name. So if you can pronounce it better, please, by all means, explain to us as best you can in phonetic spelling or something how to actually say that. I had an ex-boyfriend once whose last name was Tomaszewicz. His name was not spelled Tomaszewicz. Polish people or Eastern European people seem to love silent consonants, right? So you get like a string of 26 letters in a name, and only three of the consonants are actually heard, right? I guess the extras are just for appearance. I don't know. Anyway, the other one is Steven. Now, Dario Sierna is a Croatian soccer player. Stephen Chu is a Nobel Prize winning physicist. And of course, Aleister Crowley, who's a writer and a madman and supposedly a mystic. And he's got a whole thing with him. And then, of course, also Corey Monteith. So this guy apparently was an actor in Glee, the TV show Glee, that was found dead from an overdose. And there's a lot of suspicion around this, that he was making a gay sex tape in a motel room at the time of his overdose, right? So interesting stuff. There's your scandal for the day. Okay, so what is a mystic rectangle and why is it important? Well, a mystic rectangle essentially connects two oppositions in a chart, right? So we know Matt's got this Mercury-Uranus opposition, and he's got that Venus-Mars opposition, right? And so there's your oppositions. So what a mystic rectangle does, it connects them. So here we've got Mercury and Mars connected by a trine, because they're both air signs. Venus and Uranus are both connected by a trine, because they're both fire signs. And then Mars and Uranus by sextile, Mercury, Venus by sextile. And that gives us our Grand Cross. Now, I'm not finding a lot of useful information about it, so I'm still researching this, so excuse me that I have limited information. But here's what I will say. When we're looking at this stuff, sometimes it helps to look at other people who share the same aspect, right? So one of the things that we know is Dario, I'm assuming that's how we pronounce his name, has Mercury, Uranus, and then Sun, Jupiter as part of his mystic rectangle. And what is he? He's a famous soccer player. So Mercury and Uranus together, it will give you any number of things, but definitely will give you quick reflexes, lightning fast reflexes. The Sun, Jupiter will absolutely give you a tremendous presence and a lot of physical aptitude for sports, or possibly physical aptitude for sports. So these together, Mercury, Uranus, and Sun, Jupiter as part of the mystic rectangle, is definitely emphasizing or coalescing, bringing together all of these qualities. So lightning fast reflexes and agility and a natural athleticism. So, and who is he? He is a famous soccer player. Makes sense. He could have been anything, but it would certainly, whatever it was that he would be, would have to involve this particular combination for the rectangle to really, really be emphasized. So I guess that one of the things we do know is that with mystic rectangle, because it's emphasizing these specific planets, when it's in the mystic rectangle, if you involve yourself in these activities, this is the thing you will be most successful with and certainly most notable for, right? Now, Stephen Chu, who is a Nobel Prize winning physicist, has Jupiter and Uranus, and he's got a Mars-Saturn conjunction. We'll talk about that in a second. And Mercury with Mars-Saturn. Now, this makes sense for him. Jupiter and Uranus Jupiter is the outer limits, the maximal expression of ourselves with the world. So Jupiter is very much about where we meet the world out there. The other thing Jupiter rules is teaching, right? So Jupiter is very much about higher learning, higher education, the big philosophical questions, the big meta issues in life. Everything up there and out there that is above and beyond petty personal people interest, right? So it's the big questions in life. That's Jupiter. And we definitely see that when we talk about physics. Uranus has everything to do with science and pushing the edge and exploration and testing and seeing what else is out there and breaking stalemates, breaking through, right? Expanding your understanding and breaking open restrictions and limitations in your understanding. We also definitely see that when we talk about physics. Now, Mercury with Mars, Saturn. So, you know, this thing with Jupiter and Uranus, like this could have easily expressed itself in any number of ways. I mean, he could have been an artist, you know, and accomplished all those things. He could have been an astrology teacher. He could have accomplished those things. He could have been a world-renowned, you know, counselor, psychotherapist, drug counselor. He could have been any number of things that would have fulfilled that Jupiter-Uranus. So keep that in mind. So now, because it also involves Mercury with Mars, Saturn, now the question becomes, well, okay, if all of these things are coalescing and coming together and as a package have to be used together as a package, well, how does that work for him as a physicist? Well, and here's what's interesting. So Mercury, I just want to show you something real quick. Mercury and Saturn almost always shows up in people who are heavily involved in or strong with science. Science is a discipline. Like you don't get to go slap together a bunch of, you know, alternate facts and make it a truth. Science is absolutely about ruling things out, disproving things. One of the beautiful things about science, and the reason we love science and medicine, is that it takes whatever theory or supposition or thing that you think is true, and it says, okay, well, let's find out if it's really true. Let's do that by eliminating all the things that are not true, right? And that's where the rigorous scientific experiments and the organizing and collecting data, like it's a very Saturnine endeavor, any application of science or research. And Mercury is all about the mind, right, and observation. So Mercury and Saturn together, you're going to get people who are very heavily involved in scientific process. So now it could also be that they're engineers, because you definitely want your engineers ruling out what doesn't work before they go and build a bridge. I'm just saying. But that Mercury-Saturn is absolutely about organization and rules and doing it right and doing the tedious work that needs to be done and getting it exactly just so. Which now, when you think about it that way, it makes all kinds of sense with a physicist. Now, here's the thing though. Mars is with Saturn. So Mars with Saturn is an uncomfortable position because Mars is restricted by Saturn. Mars can't bolt out of the gate like it wants to, just run, because Saturn will not let it. Saturn is the yoke around Mars, the stallion, right, or the horse. So with a Mars-Saturn conjunction, among the many possible things that you can have with this, the one thing you will also have that we're definitely seeing here is self-discipline. So Mars-Saturn, again, this whole thing with endurance, right? Mars-Saturn has the ability to endure as much as it needs to, doing all the tedious, uncomfortable stuff that it has to get where it's trying to go. Mars and Saturn will stay the course because it has a tremendous amount of self-control and self-discipline. For you to become a Nobel Prize winning physicist, I would imagine that mentally you're going to have a lot of self-discipline and stay the course, because your experiments are not going to happen overnight. Like, it's not going to be like you whip out a theory, you know, scribble a couple notes and that's it. Okay, but it's proven, right? Some of these things could take years, decades to kind of, you know, finish out to get an actual outcome, right? Or some type of basis to support a theory one way or the other. And that requires discipline. So that makes all kinds of sense now when we look at Jupiter, Uranus, Mercury, Mars, Saturn for a Nobel Prize winning physicist such as Mr. Stephen Chu. Now, Aleister Crowley is quite the character. I enjoy this a lot. Now, I did find on the internet somebody talking about Aleister Crowley not having a mystic rectangle, but Satan's Square or something similar. So it's some type of satanic, you know, rectangle because Aleister Crowley, yada, yada, yada. So before I get into Aleister Crowley's rectangle, I just want to say this. You cannot base your interpretation of an aspect based on one person. You cannot. Good God. That is the most irresponsible, sloppy, Because what happens is when you look at one person, you look at that aspect, and you assume that everybody sharing that aspect has the same character attribute, you're basically tarring and feathering every other person on the planet with that aspect, whether they deserve it or not. Which is why, boys and girls, you cannot find signatures for rapists in charts, okay? And psychopaths and all sort of stuff. All these things that everybody seems to think is so easy and quick to do now. You know, ooh, let's go find the boogeyman in the bushes. Let's use a chart. It's not that simple, and you really have to be careful doing that, because there are a whole lot of people who will share similar aspects to a known rapist that are, surprise, not rapists. But when people irresponsibly, and this is looking at you want to be professional astrologers out there, or God forbid, even worse, the actual professional astrologers, when you put it out there that this aspect, you know, implies some sort of criminal behavior, ooh, Pluto's very rapey. Oh dear God. You're literally doing a disservice to millions of other people who share the same aspects that are not like that, because you're talking about character issues, you know, or some type of behavioral issue for other reasons that are not equal and universally applied to everybody else sharing the aspect. So you're not doing other people any favors doing that, and it's just a real disservice to astrology as an art and science by itself. So stop it. Just stop it. So with that said, naturally, the writer is talking about, you know, the Satan's Square, or whatever they call it for Aleister Crowley's mystic rectangle. Because for those of you who are not familiar with Aleister Crowley is a writer who apparently got involved in some type of ritualistic drug use, and because he was trying to talk to the other side, right? And I don't know if he was specifically trying to talk to demons or Satan, but apparently in the course of his drug-fueled paranoia and delusions, one fateful weekend, he apparently in his diaries say that he talked to Satan or something similar to that, and all, you know, dark arts and black magic and all that sort of stuff. So listen, I'm not saying that black magic and the dark arts do exist or don't exist. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that when it comes to astrology, we can't look at what somebody's doing like Aleister Crowley, you know, and look at the aspect of the chart and assume that, you know, clearly that's what this is. Because it's not. That's just silly. I'm just saying. You got to think about everybody else who shares that aspect. All right. And also, you got to look at the whole chart, not just a slice of the pie. Okay. So Aleister Crowley, our, you know, character in residence here. Now he's got a Saturn-Uranus conjunction. Now remember, we know that Saturn has a lot to do with discipline, and we see it a lot in charts of scientists, right? Because there's a discipline that has to be involved to have the patience and the endurance to stay the course and be very regimented and consistent with how we do things. That's your Saturn. Uranus, we also know, rules experiments and science and madmen. And breaking limits, breaking, you know, the rigid rules that hold us in place. And Aleister Crowley was definitely all about trying to break the rules of reality, right, and the limitations of what we know. So with the Saturn-Uranus conversation, with the Saturn-Uranus combination, the problem is, again, you know, this energy management. So Aleister Crowley would be very good at going the course for a pretty good stretch of time, but at some point that Uranian hiccup will kick in and kind of disrupt the flow, right? Or in this case, break down the experiment. So that can be problematic. Or he could just be paranoid, but that's a whole other conversation. All right, so now with the sun in midheaven, and this is where things get a little weird, and this is where you have to have exact times. The midheaven is your public persona. It is the you that the entire world sees, not the you that the people closest to you see, right? Or the you know, like the inside of the house versus the outside of the house person. So who you are outside of the house is not necessarily the person you are inside the house. Inside the house is where you are your most natural self, right? Outside the house, it is your social role in the world. It is who you are as a job, and who you are as a social status, you know, student, teacher, mother, father, politician, doctor, janitor, like pick your thing, right? So with the sun and the midheaven together, what you also have is somebody who is driven to be noticed. And what is the word that I'm looking for? not lauded, but they're recognition. They are driven to achieve recognition in this lifetime. They need recognition in this lifetime. So most of their efforts are towards getting validated and recognized for being, the top of the pile, being the best at something, right? This is what you get with Sun in Midheaven, specifically, but you also get it with Sun in the 10th house. If you have somebody who's got the Sun in the 10th house, right? What you also have is somebody who is driven to achieve recognition. They need recognition to do their karma in this lifetime. This is what they're here to do. So everything in their life is very much about being the kind of person that other people give recognition and validation to, right? And so to give you an example of how we might see this, there are many different ways this could play out, but one of the ways we can see this, guess who has Sun in the 10th house? Trump. And everything we know about him and his life, his entire identity is built on recognition, recognition, recognition. You will give me recognition, because that's what he is driven to do in this lifetime. Because, I mean, honestly, he could have been a criminal and gotten away with a whole lot of stuff and been very wealthy and very successful at being a wealthy criminal, without anyone ever knowing his name. Because even his hotels, think about this for a second, even his hotels, his branded hotels, what is the name on the hotels? It's not Mermaid International or Flotsam Jetsam, Enterprises or whatever. It's none of that. It's not the Taj Mahal. It is Trump. His name is all over everything that he is involved in, because he wants that 10th house, Sun in the 10th house recognition. So Aleister Crowley shares that, right? So with Aleister Crowley, the Saturn Uranus Sun Midheaven, everything Aleister Crowley did was very much about achieving recognition. Now, how does this play into him being a writer, madman, drug addict? Well, he made it a point of doing all this stuff, like, for the specific purpose of getting an audience and giving it to an audience who would recognize it for him, right? Because he certainly didn't do it in the privacy of his home in a mental institution. And also, too, that Saturn Uranus in and of itself is a difficult placement. And for him, we would also, because these are pretty broad planets, we would also look at his charts more specifically to get more information about how that might play out for him. But with Saturn, Uranus, Sun, Midheaven, we definitely have somebody who is, because remember, we're going into transpersonal planets. This is somebody who is here specifically and driven to do and be the expression of the maximal expression or outer limit of social interaction. So he, in his own way, he needed to be the front man on the outer limits. So the fringe element, he is the front man for the fringe element. He needs to be on the very outer limits, at the next step before we get into, beyond society or beyond the world as we know it. Or at least that's how he saw himself, and that's what he was driven towards. And he could have done this in many, many ways, like being an astronaut. But, this is what he chose. So when you see stuff like this, when I talk about, Satan's Square, or whatever this guy called it, and I'm not banging, I mean, it's a good theory. It's no worse, certainly a lot more interesting than the other theories I've seen floated around about what a mystic rectangle means. Try to avoid the trap of getting into this thing where if you see it in one chart in a very famous person who's clearly antisocial, assuming that this is what it is for everybody who shares this, because that's not the case at all. All right. Now, Matt Gaetz specifically has this Venus, Mars, Mercury, Uranus grand square, mystic rectangle, right? Well, one of the things that I found that was interesting is Corey Monteith has the same planets in a mystic rectangle. So can we look at one and determine how that might play out for the other, right? So because I don't actually know that much about Corey Monteith, so I'm just going to leave that there. If you know more than I do, please by all means share it in the comment section, because I only know what I found online. I never watched Glee, so I don't know. Okay, so with Matt, looking at Matt's chart, right? With Venus, Mars, we've discussed this extensively in the previous slide. With Mercury and Uranus, we've also touched on this, right? So with Venus, Mars, Mercury, Uranus, one of the things that we know for this mystic rectangle to activate, is he would have to get involved in something that combines all of these things. So that Venus Mars, obviously his relationships and his erotic love nature, and his charisma, right? And I hate to say it, but he's got to have some charisma, because he's not a good looking man, and there's not enough money in the world to make somebody sleep with ugly. Like, there's a limit, right? And he's very popular with certain people, so he's got some charisma, right? So that Venus Mars charisma has to be at play in something, some vehicle for this mystic rectangle to express itself. That Mercury Uranus, aside from representing the lunatic fringe, because Mercury and Uranus loves to test people, right? Like a battery test. How much charge is in there? How excited can I get you? Also, and this is what's interesting, because the Matt Gaetz saga is not over. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because Mercury and Uranus also has a lot to do with truth telling, right? So Mercury and Uranus is the great stonebreaker. It is the truth teller. It is the inconvenient, unvarnished truth. And with Mercury and Uranus like this, it is the interrupter. So the disruptor, the interrupter, the person who blurts out the thing everybody's thinking, but nobody wants to admit or say out loud. So with Venus, Mars, Mercury, and Uranus, one of the things I would expect is for this grand, I keep calling it grand cross, it's not, sorry, the mystic rectangle to express itself is some type of confession, some type of confessional about his relationships, right? So we might expect a book out of him at some point. Or it could be him dropping the dime, like literally kind of opening up the floodgates of information, right, about other people, because it's the truth, where his little tete-a-tetes are concerned. But in all ways, I'm definitely looking for some type of shocking revelation that's going to be true, and maybe a form of confession or tell-all or whatever about himself or other people, that's definitely going to involve, sex, and his sexual relations and behaviors. Now, the thing about it, it is entirely possible, because this seems to be the cheap, easy, get out of jail free card with these folks, that the Maddie boy may claim, right, that it was, a sex addiction. Oh, I had a sex addiction, which is total nonsense. That's not even close to the truth. So we can expect that claim to come out before this is over, right? What I do expect is some level of exposure for a lot of people where his little tete-a-tetes are concerned. And now, right, again, so how does this come into play with Corey? Well, so here's one of the ways that it expressed itself for Corey Monteith. So the gay sex, right, or the sex in general, let's not even make it gay sex, let's just make it sex. So Corey Monteith's sex was definitely the Venus-Mars combination in the chart, right? Now, here's the thing. So where's this Mercury-Uranus, right? Well, Uranus is the truth, okay? And Mercury, also is communications. So a videotape of Corey having what is considered illicit sex or unacceptable sex, because if it were acceptable, why would he be hiding it, and or the drug use, would be the truth. This would be the truth about this Venus-Mars for Corey. And the important thing here is that Corey participated in this. This wasn't somebody else offering it up. Corey participated in making this tape, if there is one, allegedly, that would absolutely tell the truth about what was going on in his personal life that he didn't want other people to know. With that said, same thing here. Whatever this truth telling is that has to be involved for this grand cross, this mystic rectangle to activate, it has to come from Matt himself. That's why I'm saying we should see something like that come up. So that's my take on the mystic rectangle. I don't have anything fantastic to give you guys, like, ooh, it's going to make you so psychic. I mean, I don't have it. I'm not seeing it, but it's not impossible. So take that with a grain of salt. Again, I'm learning about mystic rectangles myself because I don't see them that often. you know, and make your observations, and we'll all learn together. And watch for a confession from Matt Gaetz. And that, my dears, brings us to the end of our video today. This was part 5 of 7. Only 2 more to go, and then we will no longer talk about Matt Gaetz. I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, if you enjoyed it, please support the channel and give me some feedback by liking it. Let me know if you liked it or not, or even if you didn't like it, let me know. If you want to get the other video series as they come up, definitely subscribe so you get notifications. Also too, we're still doing Jennifer Lopez and all her many men. So if you want notifications about that as well, definitely make sure you subscribe so you get the notifications when they come up. And of course, also, if you think somebody might benefit from this, or, you know, I don't know, maybe you want to bore your friends to death, need something to fall asleep by, you can share this with them too. All right, we'll talk to you guys later. Bye.